But I did a podcast before starting this one, just called the Matt Forney Show. That was basically the same thing, doing whatever was on my mind. The new podcast I do is a bit more tightly focused because I'm doing it for someone else,
Right.
But they're paying me, so I'm not complaining.
Oh, that would be so nice. I would love to make some money. Broke is a perpetual state of my life. It continues on and it expands. So this is Matthew Forney. I unfortunately have had. I try to stay away from the the super crazy fringe movements such as like feminism and some of the MRAs and stuff like that. Because I don't have any direct experience with them with the people in my life, so it hasn't been something I've been particularly interested in. Yeah. Whereas recently I have a relative of mine who's been really hardcore into this this MGTOW thing. And I some of the stuff he's coming up with, to me it just seems like he's profoundly injured and has been injured by women, and that's where all of his aggression is coming from. And him having no actual experience with women, he's not able to accurately portray them in his own mind, which is in turn basically it's just an evil loop. And so he has this negative image of them in his mind, so he can't portray him or he tends to treat them badly, but not intentionally.
Oh, okay.
He tends to think he has this very pious and well thought out position on them, and it's just not. He doesn't have the experience to get there, and it's that lack of experience and that thought process that he's stuck in that prevents him from going any farther with women.
Oh, geez, he sounds like a typical MGTOW cultist.
Yes, he does. And so all the stuff he's been touting, I've just pretty much been arguing him down. Not in an aggressive way, but in a very supportive and loving way as best I can. Just being like, look, dude, I understand that you've got some issues, but let's work them out instead of having these weird delusions about women. But in looking up arguments and thoughts, I guess, along this vein, I came across an article written by you, and that's pretty much my experience with you. Okay. I reached out to you to...
I guess it was the Return of Kings article?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Oh, that one got me so much shit from the cultists, so really? It's like they were not happy about what I had to say. And you have some confirmation, it turns out I was right. About a lot of these kids. And I don't really talk about that much more anymore, but I'm trying to sort of soft pedal it just because, a lot of these bigger I guess you could call it MGTOW now, figures like Barbarossa and stuff are legitimate narcissists. And the guy structures his entire online operation like a cult. And he deliberately preys on someone like your relative there. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of tragic too, because it's like I could go into greater detail on the podcast itself, but yeah, I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the idea of the podcast, man. With me introducing you, that's the podcast has started.
Oh, cool.
It's not an interview so much as it is a conversation.
Somebody I do too, so.
Yeah, somebody pointed out on the I recently had an argument with somebody in the comments, and it was basically somebody saying that they it felt like more like a conversation than it did an interview. It was like, well, yeah, that's kind of what I was going for. Like, I don't want to necessarily do interviews. Interviews are fine, but they lack a sort of nuanced feel to them. They're very cold and hitting the nail on the head. That's not kind of what I'm after.
Yeah, that's generally what I go for too. Like, for example, when I do show prep for a podcast, like I don't write down questions. I'll write down like ideas I want to get to or points because I wanted to make it go more clearly.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I've got bits and pages based on different interviews I've done. So with you had so I liked the narrative of your blog post. It was written very well, and Thanks. I enjoyed. As much as the flow, it seemed to be very informational, and you provided links to, and you cited all your sources and stuff. It was a really good article. But it seemed like, so the founders of this whole movement, I guess first let's explain what it is. So it's essentially, if you don't know what it is, it's men going their own way. And as far as I can see, it's sort of like a slightly more extreme MRA, men's rights activist kind of branch. If I had to venture a guess.
Yeah. Well, to describe it a bit more, the history of men going their own way was that around 2005, 2004 stuff, some of the guys who were originally involved in the early stages of the men's rights movement just decided, they created it as a sort of counterpoint, an anti-movement, because as the joke went, as Rob Fetters described it, everyone was going in their own direction. No one was getting together to unite. It's like every man was going his own way.
Right.
So this was a way of sort of fighting feminism and statism. And men going their own way is associated with not getting married, but the original Men Going Their Own Way manifesto it didn't mention marriage at all. It had 3 points. Instill masculinity in men, instill femininity in women, and work towards limited government. Marriage had nothing to do with it. That sort of got lumped into it because a lot of the men going their way didn't really want to get married, but they weren't opposed to it. Just do your own thing. Don't live out of don't live what for someone else's expectations. Live for yourself.
Right. I think that's valid. Like I think that's a valid form of thought.
Yeah, but somewhere along the line, I'd say around maybe 2011, 2012, Men Going Their Own Way became associated with never, like, swearing off the female species entirely, sex.
Yeah.
Not associating with them, not respecting them, and working to be as minimalistic as possible, which is being minimalistic is not it's not a bad thing in and of itself, but combined with all this, it's about encouraging young men who really haven't lived life, because the guys who were involved with Men Going Their Own Way were like I think Zed was in his 60s, Fetters is in his late 40s. These are guys who live life, they've going around on motorcycles. They experienced feminism and all these social movements firsthand, and part of it was just sort of exasperation, like life's too short to get involved in a pointless political movement. But you've got guys who are have not even kissed a girl, who are like I'm going my own way, blah blah blah.
Yes.
That's really dangerous, particularly when you've got some characters out there like Barbarossa who are structuring their little MGTOW websites like cults.
That makes sense. So can you how are they structured like cults? Like what's the what framework are they using?
Now, for starters, Barbarossa does not. He refuses to accept evolutionary psychology, but he created his own form of evolutionary psychology based around Briffault's law, which has been debunked. Briffault's law Briffault was a communist, but to basically say Briffault's law was every interaction in nature occurs because the female wants it to. If the female doesn't want it, there's no interaction. Which a look outside, your door,
that's like demonstrably false.
Like rape, yeah. So that's number one. Number two, he's constantly shilling for money. He's constantly telling people, "Oh, I can't keep doing this without your without your input." He's begging for money for his patron. At one point, he was trying to I'm going to write a 1,000-word MGTOW book if I can get 2,000, 3,000 a month. But if I can only make 1,500, then I'll write a 500-page book, which is completely disregarding the structure
which
you need to write a book.
Well, yes. It also here's the thing about my show. It's not something I would do. Like even if this show never makes any money, I enjoy doing the show.
Yeah. Yeah, if you love the ideas that you're espousing, you should be able to do them. Maybe not the most frequent clip, but this guy is constantly trying to shake down his audience. Number two, the guy is incredibly thin-skinned. I posted a video back in September criticizing him, and this guy claims to be an engineer and who with a girlfriend. He's on my video within an hour during work hours on the East Coast. That's where he lives, and he's already bashing me. And he's brought his entire coterie of cultists to bash me and downvote my video. And number four, he's constantly urging people. You've got that cult hypocrisy element there, where he's constantly urging men to not interact with women, but he himself has a girlfriend. And number five, he constantly redefines terms to suit his own ends. For example, in one blog post, the guy has a narcissistic fixation on me. He mentions me in at least one post on his blog every month. And
maybe he's secretly gay and he's just into you, man.
As Peter Steele put it, I like goils. But anyway. In this article, he redefined sexuality. He said, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but he's talking about the alpha beta terminology, and he's saying that sexuality, these PUAs, which I'm not a PUA, but he keeps calling me one, want to change their sexuality to one where it's more effortless, where they are like women and they just effortlessly attract. That's not the definition of sexuality. Sexuality is who you're attracted to, like homosexuality, heterosexuality. Right. It's nothing to do with how good you are with women or whatever.
Right.
But he redefines these terms as a way of muddling thinking and getting these kids who are like 18, 19, 20, whatever, who have not really experienced life and are not that well read, to just go along with this and scream and get angry at anyone who criticizes them.
Right. That does sound like I don't necessarily cultist behavior, but definitely some very narrow-minded behavior. So, like a good example, I think of cultist behavior. There's a group my my lovely wife, she's watching this, just so you know, sweetheart, I absolutely love you. But there was a group that she was following. She might still follow. I'm not entirely sure. But they were they were talking about their control structure seems to be in their teaching. They're very very hippie group. They have a commune, and they sort of control everything from the top. And especially they control everything from women by saying, or like in their preaching, it's that the women give the energy to men so that men can shape the world. Like it's very man-centered. Yeah. So in that instance, I can understand some rejection to that, but it's very plainly a method of control. So for his thing, I don't necessarily see his or see that method of control. So I don't know about a cult so much as a gathering of really dumb people.
Maybe cult-like is a better way to
cult-like,
describe it.
Yeah, all right, yeah. So you had mentioned this that there were some of the founders, they sort of stepped away from the whole idea. Like, what's that about?
Well, the thing is, is like, a lot of these guys, ultimately, I mean, at the core, going your own way, eventually at some point, you're just going to get bored of this. A lot of these guys have just, quit doing their blogs to go live life, and it's a sort of it's a way of, I've said this before, but I forget the exact name of the law, but the adage, good money drives out, bad money drives out good. Talking about currency. In the context of economics, if you have clipped coins in a circulation, eventually you're just going to end up with completely worthless currency. That also applies to online communities and gatherings. You can see this on the comment sections of sites that reach a certain level of popularity. Mm-hmm. The bad people drive out the good people, because the good people, are not as invested in their online identities. They're not like, ooh, I need to get more upvotes on Reddit or whatever.
Yeah, I could give half a shit.
They're not going to be as invested in arguments. They're eventually going to be like, screw this, I'm going to go live my life.
Right.
Whereas the bad people are going to be constantly on the internet, constantly, talking about, oh, I just pwned you, noob, blah blah blah. And it sort of contradicts, if you were really going your own way, you wouldn't be hovering around on a forum,
right? You wouldn't
or
care.
Constantly talking about women constantly. You'd be off doing your own thing,
right?
Riding a motorcycle, or playing games, playing in a band, whatever it is you want to do. You wouldn't be constantly harping on this one issue.
That's the primary thing I've noticed with him, is that he seems to be not interested in women. He's swearing them off and all this kind of good stuff. But every other thing he posts on his social media is all MGTOW bullcrap. And every single argument, I walk him through every single argument as best I can. And now he's to the point where he just doesn't talk to me.
Oh God, yeah. Basically, I mean, to a certain extent, when you uncover and realize that some aspects of mainstream wisdom are wrong, you're going to go through an anger period. But the point is, number one, it subsides, and number two, immediately eject everything from the mainstream. Just because someone is like in opposition to whatever is being taught on TV or whatever doesn't mean everything they say is right. You're just swapping one. You're still doing groupthink, but you're just switching who you're getting it from.
Right. So you'd mentioned possibly some connections with the movement and yourself. Was there any ideas of the movement that sort of you adopted?
Yeah, I like to say Rob Fetter's blog, No Ma'am. It's no-ma'am.blogspot.com. Kind of influenced my thinking, because the guy did an extensive study of cultural Marxism and how male and female nature worked throughout the ages. That was those ideas that he extensively researched. He didn't just, a lot of these newer guys are just pulling stuff out of their ass, whereas he went to the library and he extensively studied this for well over a decade. So I took some influence from that. But the thing is, ironically, a lot of newer MGTOWs they've not read this stuff. They overtly reject it. For example, as I mentioned, the guy, one of the major MGTOW figures today, Barbarossa, actually denounced the MGTOW manifesto because he's a socialist. He doesn't want to admit he's a socialist, and he's like, well, we can't have limited government. He's trying to mislead people as to his political affiliation. If he wants to be a leftist, that's fine. But you should be honest about it. Constantly tries to play both sides, and he rejects the ideas on which, if you reject the manifesto of a movement or culture, then you can't claim to be part of it. If I claim to say, for example, be a communist, but I reject, that Karl Marx guy, he didn't know what he was talking about, then I'm not really a communist. If you reject the foundational document of a philosophy, then you can't claim to espouse that philosophy. These guys, these newer MGTOW guys, they don't want you to see reality for yourselves. They want you to get it from them. and that's why they attract so many vulnerable young guys who are just not experienced with life.
No, that makes sense. So I guess what is your earlier interpretations of the movement? Like, when did that start to die off for you? Like, what sort of ideas shifted your, I guess, separation from that sort
Well,
of
I'm
faction?
I'm not. I tend to sort of my way of looking at these sort of movements or whatever. You've heard of the manosphere, the alt right. I take what I want, I need for them, and you sort of move on.
You take what's useful.
Yeah, my friend Trevor Blake, it was a writer. He put it like this: when you get to a river, you build a bridge to cross the river. But when you cross the river, you don't take the bridge with you.
Right.
You have to. So for me, I mean, I used to sort of a long time ago, I wouldn't have minded using the label to apply to myself because I was, embodying the original principle. I was living my own way, and I'm still doing that, but I don't use the label anymore because it's been corrupted, it's been toxic. Used to be back in 2009. Men going their own way was on paper, it was a pretty admirable goal, something to achieve to. But now, if you say you're men going their way, immediately they assume you're a virgin living in your mother's basement with Cheeto dust coated all over your keyboard.
Yeah, pretty much. So what's the interpretation now? Like, where do you think that comes from? Do you think it's from people like my cousin joining these little fringe groups, or do you think it's, I guess, where do you think it comes from?
It's a feedback between both. Because on the one hand, you guys like your cousin experience, they're being led into it by people like Barbarossa or Stardust. Or there's humorous enough one major MGTOW personality who does videos, but he says he can't speak, so he does everything through a voice-to-speech synthesizer. And I'm thinking to myself, if you can't speak, why are you doing videos? It's like trying to type without having hands.
Right.
But
blog.
It's. But basically, I think what happened was just like I said, the people who were really embodied MGTOW just sort of got bored with it and moved on, with their lives, and the bad people came in and sort of assimilated. You can see this with like other movements as well. If you take, for example, what happened to libertarianism compared to today, back when say 2007, 2008, 2012, when Ron Paul was the major figure. You had a lot of libertarianism squarely focused on small government, solid money, the gold standard, etc. But when Ron Paul retired, what happened was you had a bunch of types like Lee Borowski, Kathy Weiss, who suddenly made about polyamory and gay butt sex or whatever, something that has nothing to do with the original movement. So What happens is you just have a lot of it's just I don't want to say an inevitable process, but a process of the people who let it just sort of moving on, either intellectually or literally, and just people trying to assume the label for their own ends.
I see. Yeah. So what do you think? Is there any hope for these people that sort of have espoused to these ideas? Do you think there's anything that could get them to evolve as people?
Well, I think, the fact that a lot of them are young is both as a bad thing because they're impressionable, but it also means that a lot of them are going to grow up. Back around when I was, 18 to 19, 20, I never fell into any of these groups, but I espoused and did a lot of things that I regret. I've been writing in some form or another on the internet since 2009. And when I go over stuff that I wrote back in 2009, I think to myself, like, what the fuck was I thinking? This is ridiculous. This is stupid.
Yeah, I watched some of my earlier videos to the very same extent.
You grow and you evolve as a person just by experiencing life, etc. So some of these guys will snap out of their own accord, but I think for a lot of them, I forgot who originally said this, but my philosophy is that I don't try to sort of convince people otherwise who've been sort of snapped in this sort of cult type thinking. I let them alone. If someone asks me what my opinions are, or they ask me for guidance, that's one thing. But I don't go around espousing my views just because it causes more trouble than it's worth. A lot of people don't want to hear the truth, or they don't want to. They want to stick to where they believe it. And the only shit that is growing a little, or perhaps having life experience, or maybe something more traumatic. I don't know, but I don't. That's really the only solution I see.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. So what's what other sort of things are you interested in, and what's the world look like from your perspective?
Well, my main focus now is I'm a journalist, and I've mainly been covering the presidential election for Right On, Return of Kings, and a number of other sites. I spent most of the first half this year. I was in January. I was covering the Iowa caucuses up to the caucus day. I covered the election here in Illinois on March 15th, the Super Tuesday 2, I think it was, and was witness when the Donald Trump rally here, I'm in Chicago, just devolved into a complete riot.
Really?
I was in New York to cover the election there, and I covered the Indiana primary, which was, as it turned out, the last relevant primary, at least on the Republican side. I would have liked to go out to California to cover the Democratic primary, but I needed a break from everything. Just very hectic driving everywhere and meeting all these deadlines. I needed a bit of a vacation.
I completely understand, man, and that's sounds amazing. That sounds far more interesting than the ideas of the MGTOW.
Oh yeah, I've seen and done some. I don't want to push my stuff too hard, but it's you can see my archive at say righton.net, which is where most of my reports on the Iowa caucuses ended up. I came up with I don't want to push it too hard, but possible evidence of voter fraud on behalf of Microsoft trying to push up Marco Rubio's vote share simply because. I went around I saw every major candidate that was running in Iowa with the exception of John Kasich, and that's just because he didn't put any resources into it because he figured, he's more of a secular Republican, and, he'd get more play out of New Hampshire. Iowa's a somewhat religious state. But I saw every other candidate on both the Democratic and Republican sides. And Trump, for example, was drawing overflow crowds of 10,000 people, 5,000 people, etc. Cruz drew, I think, about 700, 750 people. The one Rubio event I went to, he drew about 100 people at most. But in the final vote count, he came within, I think, a few hundred votes of dethroning Trump for, second place, which seemed really fishy to me. And as it turned out, it'd be kind of pointless because in the next debate in New Hampshire, you just completely, get all your Robo Rubio jokes out and just completely crash down to fifth place. So that was an example of some of the things I saw. And also, going to these events, gives me a perspective on which, the media is distorting a lot,
yes.
And you need to actually see these things in person, just to sort of, get the full story. That's my philosophy, and my philosophy is also, everyone watching this, maybe not everyone, but we have smartphones, we have internet access, we've got the tools necessary. If you want to report on something, you just need to whip out your phone and start filming. The internet has made it very easy for anyone. I mean, you started a podcast, just because you want to. I have all my internet shit. Anyone can do this. We don't need to rely on the Washington Post or CNN or whatever. We can get it ourselves.
Exactly, and also I think a lot of times with media and even podcasts and individually produced things and stuff like that, you still have to ask yourself, is it bullshit? Because there's a lot of bullshit out there. Most media outlets, depending on the time that you're watching them, they're under no obligation to tell you the truth.
Oh yeah, it's all about a lot of it is just advertiser driven, and a lot of it is politics driven. And that's why my philosophy, for example, is I don't accept advertising. I have a limited form of advertising on my website, but I only accept advertising from people I trust and know.
Right. That's my thing. Is that I'm willing to advertise on my show, but I'm not going to accept something I don't support. I'm not going to just hawk some cheap Chinese-made bullshit or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't advertise on my YouTube videos because I don't want them putting up stuff that I disagree with.
Right.
My funding comes from my book, the books I published, from the articles I write for other sites, and I also do donations for every so often. That's really the only way to stay independent and not have your your views influenced by someone outside. Is to either you have to sell a product or you have to appeal directly to your viewers, which is I actually got done talking today on my podcast. I interviewed Pax Dickinson, the CTO of WeSearcher. He's also working with Chuck Johnson.
And I'm sorry, man. One more time. What's the name of your podcast and where can people find it?
This Alt-Right Life. You can go to righton.net to see it. You can also go to my website, mattforney.com. All of my articles and stuff are cross-posted there. But anyway, the guy I was talking to, Pax Dickinson, CTO of WeSearcher, is saying that basically advertiser-driven websites are pretty much on the way out, in part due to the fact that the economy is declining. Advertising is discretionary spending at heart. So when the economy starts declining and people are making less money, these companies are making less money, the first thing they do is they cut their that's one of the first things they do. They cut their advertising budgets. And number two, a lot of these companies, such as Gawker, have just pissed off people to such a degree that their business models aren't sustainable. Like right now, Nick Denton's just trying to stay afloat after getting sued into oblivion by Hulk Hogan and Peter Thiel. You know, he crossed the line and now he's paying for it. And
What's he being sued for?
Basically, Gawker published a sex tape of Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan sued for invasion of privacy, and he won. You know, because as it turns out, you know, publishing a celebrity sex tape really isn't newsworthy. You know,
Right.
And
Yeah, that was going to be my next statement, which was who really cares?
yeah, it's like, you know, they just did it for clicks, and as a result, they're now paying out they're appealing their settlement, but eventually he's going to run out of money. And
Right.
these other sites like BuzzFeed, Vice are laying off people left and right. Mike had to lay off people, I think. You know, this sort of, you know, this era of, you know, 5 totally cool ways to, you know, something like that. You know, it's on its way.
I hope
out.
to God no one clicks on that shit anymore. It's exhausting.
Christ.
It's done. It's played.
I every time I see one of those headlines, I just sort of, you know, the vein in my forehead rises a little. But it's like, as it turns out, it's completely unsustainable in this era. You know, it's like, you know, because another factor why advertising-driven sites are dying because everyone has ad block these days.
Right.
You know, I've got ad block. You know, and with ad block on, nobody sees the ads. They don't play.
Well, even
you have a number of sites like New York Times or the New Statesman, or try to cut you off from reading the site if you have ad block on. Well, there you can stay one step ahead of it by installing a JavaScript blocker, or you can just not go there. And Pax talked about this on my podcast, but he wagers that the sites that have implemented these blocks that prevent you from reading if you have ad block installed have seen their traffic levels crater because people aren't content on these sites is not that so valuable that people are willing to make that sacrifice. You know,
Right.
People don't want to see this stuff anymore.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I think I would be okay with seeing ads if they were tailored to me. Like if it was stuff I legitimately wanted to see. And if I'm not interested in seeing ads, like if I'm really not in the market for anything, don't show me any ads.
Yeah, I don't mind ads, you know, as long as, you know, like you said, they're relevant and also, you know, they're not too obtrusive. But you see a lot of these sites now, the pop-ups everywhere.
Yes. Even if it's just a banner on the top and stuff like that, that's fine. But if it's something that pops up and I've got to click out of, and don't make it annoying.
Stuff like that. And
page.
also, I'm using a relatively old computer, and having those ads blow up makes certain sites like Breitbart unreadable. You know, in fact, I lived in the Philippines for a couple years ago, and during the period where I was there, you know, I was on a metered internet connection where I had to pay after the first gigabyte in a month's usage. So blocking, you know, if I had allowed my browser to run ads, you know, I would have been wasting bandwidth and having to pay more money. So all these things factor in to cause the death of advertising-driven websites. You know, in many ways, the future of content production or, you know, publishing is going to be driven by patronage or by creating products like a book or DVD series, depending on what niche you work in. Simply showing all these crazy ads everywhere isn't going to cut it anymore.
Yeah, I think so. Well, a lot of the guys that I've been interviewing, they're all part of like Futurism Australia and all that kind of good stuff, or Transhumanism Australia. So they've got a lot of very interesting ideas about how the future is going to look, especially when it comes to advertising and stuff like that. I think it's going to be a fascinating world.
Yeah, but in the meantime, we're going to see a lot of, shall we say, creative destruction, as the Silicon Valley people put it. We're going to see a ton of places go out of business. We're going to see, we've seen a lot of legacy media type places. Like, for example, the New York Times is on the verge of collapse. They had to be bailed out by Carlos Slim, the Mexican billionaire. We've seen many legacy conservative publications like National Review are barely hanging on. Everyone is feeling the burn in some fashion. And the new media structures that come out of this are going to be, they're not going to rely on advertising it's going to have to be a direct appeal. That's it. That's the only way to make money. I mean, if I try to make money through advertising, I'd be flat broke.
Yeah, for the most part. I don't know. I still think it's possible if your show has enough appeal. Then I think advertising is okay to make some money on, as long as it's not something that's excessive.
Plus, a lot of people don't seem to consider that the other value of getting, say, a second job. Maybe, you know.
Right.
I mean, there was an example about a year ago, I think, of there was this feminist writer up in Toronto who was like, you know, going around to coffee shops and doing like these sort of, you know, making derisive comments about men and taking pictures of them, you know, and stuff, you know, some sort of mansplaining type nonsense. And then she has a patron, you know, she's like,
what we're doing right now, we're mansplaining.
Yeah, you have a patron, and we're supposed to give you money for what? So you can go around creeping on people. If
Right.
that's what you really want to do, and you can't get paid for it, maybe you should just get a job. Not everyone is owed a living through their content creation.
Right.
Something like
I don't expect to make a living doing this. I'd like to, and so I appreciate the any input and things like that I've had.
yeah. I mean, I had a day job up until about 2 years ago.
Yeah, I
It's
still
by,
have a day job. I still have a family to support, and I still want to
Yeah.
eat and pay my mortgage and
etc. Yeah, it's like and most of the great writers, artists of history had day jobs. Lydia Lunch was a waitress. Hunter Thompson worked as a copy boy.
Oh, Hunter Thompson.
Charles Bukowski was a postman. It's if you're not making money off of your art or whatever, you need to scratch up at a day job until you do.
Right.
That's we see a lot of entitlement from a lot of people these days who just expect people to give them money for being fabulous or whatever.
Yeah, I'm totally not expecting that. I don't know, kinda. I want my show to be fabulous. I want to bring people interesting content and ideas, and that's the idea behind the show. And if they like it, then they can support it through whatever means necessary.
Yeah, but yeah, it's that's the way forward. And
Yeah.
I think it's been a good show so far. You're putting out good content. So
I
we're
like
all-
to think so, but
Yeah.
I'm my worst critic. I'm my absolute worst critic. There's I've also tried to write. I've also done a couple open mics doing stand up, and it's not. I'm a worst critic, man. I could do okay, which is good for somebody starting out in something, and I'll think I'm so bad I'll never do this again.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm kind of the same way. But it's like the new podcast I've been doing is getting a lot of positive press and a lot of views. So listens. So that's been really it's been affirming for me. And gives me motivation to keep going.
Well, there's a few ideas that I've been toying around with, and one of them is he's a well-known radio broadcaster. I can't remember his name to save my life, which is horrible for me. But his idea was sort of during the first year or two of you doing whatever it is you're doing, if you're writing, if you're doing artwork, or whatever it is that you're doing, it's not something that you can't expect to be something. You can't expect to be good at it right out of the gate. See, most people have this ability to watch content or look at some artwork or read a book or something, and they really appreciate that content. They can appreciate it, but they don't have the skill. They know when it's good versus when it's bad, but they don't have the skill to create necessarily something that is good. They don't understand what that process is to get there, and so that's sort of what I'm doing over the first year or two, at the very least, with my show, sort of trying to figure out what the process is to make a good show.
Yeah, I've actually discussed this. I wrote a book on this sort of process called Confessions of an Online Hustler. And one of the first chapters is about, the process by which you can find something that, you hone a talent at something and how to, monetize it. That's actually the advice I suggest. When you're starting out, and you're not experienced with this stuff, you have to sort of flail around a bit, find a groove, improve your skills. It takes a while. No one's, you have to practice at it, and a lot of people just want to cut to the front of the line. It's like the analogy I use. It's like looking at, say, a band and looking at the drummer and be like, oh, that guy's job is easy. All he does is hit things with sticks. That's what you say if you have no experience with music. But here's the thing. I mean, I have some experience with music. The drummer is the guy who's responsible for keeping everyone else in time.
He's the
guy. The guy
he's
who,
the tempo, pretty much. Yeah, I've played in a few local bands that I've been musically inclined since I was little.
Yeah, if you go in with that mentality, you're not going to succeed. It's like, oh, this is easy. Most people who start out like that, they end up quitting whatever they're doing. 3 months, 6 months, a year later. It's a process of continual practice until you land on something that works. I mean, I'm somewhat lucky in that I stumble across something that works, that's been working for me, and I'm grateful to my readers for being able to support me through all of it.
So as a writer, who are your influences? What made you want to become a writer, man? What was that push for you?
It's been going on ever since I was a little kid. I mean, there was never any spark. But when I was a kid, I was kind of a nerdy guy, and I spent a lot of time reading. I read a lot of.
You want to be the pot of the kettle.
Yeah, but yeah, I read a lot of Hunter Thompson. I was a big fan of Louis Ferdinand Céline, who is he's one of the most influential Western writers in the Western canon of the 20th century. If you haven't already, I recommend checking out his book, Journey to the End of the Night, as well as Death on the Installment Plan.
Death on the Installment Plan? That sounds fascinating.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's his humor is very dark, but it's also very funny. It's a satire of inter France between World War One and World War Two. But I read a lot of. I went through an Ayn Rand stage, which ended when I lost my virginity, and
Congratulations.
yeah, I mean, and I actually spent a lot of time, I actually went back and read like stuff from the 1800s. I actually at one point plowed through, I think, Pride and Prejudice, as well as the Wuthering Heights, chick novels. But when you read the classics, you start to realize a lot of them just are crap.
Yes.
I mean, I read Wuthering Heights just because I recognized the title.
That was the worst
like,
for me in high school, was being forced to read these god awful novels, and it's like, no, there's much more interesting things to read.
Oh God, yes. I think that's part of. I think that's part of what discourages people. They're forced to read some postmodernist nonsense instead of stuff that's relevant or interesting.
Right. Like at the time, I was being forced to read these horrible novels, and I was interested in like fantasy books, and so I've read a lot of I read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all that before it was even considered to be a movie. I went into Song of Ice and Fire, and I didn't get all the way through those. Obviously, they're a fairly newer genre. Got into Harry Dresden, and they're good writers, but and the content's fairly shallow, I guess. But that was the kind of thing I was into. I wasn't necessarily interested in this romance story. It just didn't appeal to me at the time, and it discouraged me from reading.
Well, one of the things I've been trying to push back in part of my career is the idea that writing doesn't need to be pretentious or overblown in order to be good. There's a good book by B.R. Myers called The Writer's Manifesto, or A Writer's Manifesto, in which he discombobulates a number of, he wrote it back in 2000, but he discombobulates a number of major acclaimed literary writers like Cormac McCarthy and Paul Auster, talking about how their books don't make any sense, they're poorly written, they use too many words. The case of McCarthy, he talks about how Cormac McCarthy basically ripped off Louis L'Amour, who was a writer of westerns back in the 50s and 60s. But L'Amour was in many ways better because he didn't go to these stereotypes of Indians and cowboys and whatnot. His writing actually a lot more depth to it. Just that Cormac McCarthy gets more attention from the literary set because he uses big fancy words, and he doesn't use quotation marks and big themes and blah blah blah. Whereas Louis L'Amour is for the proles.
Well, whatever floats your boat, really, in as far as reading goes. As I've sort of gotten older, I'd say more recently, within the past maybe 5 years, it's harder for me to, I used to be really into comics and stuff like that, and then it's harder for me to focus on video games or things that are less based in reality. It's hard for me to maintain that same enthusiasm for them when reality at the moment is so much more both important to pay attention to, and also it seems just have more interesting things going on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be big into video games when I was a kid, and I sort of got back to it after Gamergate, but I just sort of dropped off. And I was also the editor of Reaction, which is a video game website and the sister site of Return of Kings for a while. But after a while, I just sort of like, this is kind of a waste of time, It's like, I mean, most of the books I read now, are stuff people send me, to the point where I'm finding it difficult to get to the stuff I want to read. But most of my time is focused on nonfiction. Though there is one,
as same here now, and more
and literary
more
nonfiction. Well, I actually have to recommend one book I picked up recently called "Pushing Rubber Downhill" by Adam Piggott. It's a memoir of. He writes about how when he was in his early 20s, he was dating a girl in her 30s, and then she's all like, I'm going to move to Sydney to become a model. And he decides, he's going to get on his motorcycle and go across Australia to meet up with her. And then he realizes that part of the reason she moved away was because she didn't want to be with him anymore. Yeah. And he starts, sort of wandering around taking odd jobs until he eventually becomes a whitewater raft instructor. It's a story of, male discovery and, a young man going out to find his way in the world.
Right. Did you ever read any, it's Robert Parsig?
I have not.
Was it Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance?
I know the book. I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's nothing to do about motorcycle maintenance, by the way. It's this guy's story. He'd had some mental problems previously, and he came out of it basically with a completely different personality. And he's trying to reconnect with his son, so they take a cross-country trip on the back of a motorcycle. And it's about like all the things that, just thoughts and ideas he had along the road, and it's his story. And yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. It's thoughts about masculine discovery, really. The road of.
I assume it's better written than, say, On the Road. Like, Kerouac is a good writer when you're
On the
young. But it's
Road.
like
On the Road was
Jack Kerouac.
yes, much better, much better
Yeah.
written.
Yeah,
It's more philosophy surrounding Zen and lots of Buddhist ideas and stuff like that. It's interesting and very well written.
Yeah, Kerouac is, it doesn't age well. Like if you read, On the Road at 17 or 18, you think it's the most profound thing ever, and then
Right.
5 years later, I'm like, what is this bullshit? It's just a rambling, it's a rambling, stream of consciousness nonsense from a kid who just, thinks too highly of himself.
Well, I think that's kind of what you do is as you're growing up, you come into teenagehood and you're like, oh, I got it. I understand everything now. I understand it. And then in your 20s, it's basically learning, what you don't understand, that most of what you think is full of shit. And then say later in your 20s toward your 30s, at least that's where I am, is trying to figure out or trying to find what that sense of reality or wisdom or whatever, something real.
Oh yeah. It's that's what I've experienced as well. I mean, I'm going to be turning 28 this month, and
I'll be 30.
A lot of my reading time has been vacuumed up from what I've been doing with the election and whatnot, and other news stories I've been covering. But it's I to a certain extent, I feel like I'm moving into a new phase of my life. The past 3, 4, 5 years were like exploration and discovery, and I've sort of settled into a niche of what I'm doing, and it's successful, and I like doing it, and that's what I'm focusing on now.
Well, good. That's pretty much what my later 20s has been, is trying to shift the direction that my life is going, and so far I'm quite happy with it.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah, it seems to get better and better every year. It's wonderful. A little bit more money in my pocket wouldn't go amiss, but other than that. So where do you stand politically? Who do you fancy for president this upcoming election? I know it's a little far off. I know a lot can change, but
I'm pretty much identified with the alt-right and the manosphere. I'm more or less in the tank for Trump, just because the two big issues for me are free trade and immigration, and Trump is the first candidate on both sides. Well, Bernie Sanders is sort of covering it. I don't think I'd vote for Bernie Sanders, but I'm sympathetic to him and his followers, just because he represents both Trump and Sanders represent the people taking back control of the parties from corporate interests.
That's exactly what I think. What they represent is they're not part of the same old shit we've had year after year. They're both different, and that's kind of what the country's craving.
Yeah, I look at it from kind of a personal perspective, the free trade issue. I mean, I grew up in upstate New York. I grew up in Syracuse, which used to be it's a major, semi-major state in the Rust Belt. These are areas that were built on manufacturing jobs. And when NAFTA and these free trade agreements came in, they completely devastated the entire area, the Midwest. I mean, I don't know where you are, but basically,
deep south, man, deep south. I can make it to the Gulf, like at Louisiana,
cool.
And the Gulf is literally 2 hours away.
But basically, I've seen the economic devastation that free trade wrought with my own eyes, and Trump and Sanders are the only candidates who are looking to sort of, reverse that, We should not be letting our manufacturing base be moved wholesale to Mexico or China or wherever. It's not benefiting anyone except the people who own the companies.
Well, my concerns with Trump aren't that he's not forward-thinking enough. I think with the coming technological revolution, the thoughts of AI, like there's a cybersecurity AI at the moment that is, and it's on the corner of being here. It's pretty much here. Sometime next year, I'm on the list to get to try it in my organization, and that could potentially take my job because most of what I do is just data analytics. And there's a machine, a learning algorithm that can do data analytics, if not, I would say definitely better than I could, better than probably any human can. And so the coming wave of automation and AI and all of these things, I think it needs to be taken into account when we start looking at where we're going to be in the next 10 years.
That's an interesting perspective, and it actually sort of dovetails what you originally wanted me to talk about. I don't think thinking towards technological improvements is relying on them is a good way forward. Just because no one can predict the future, really.
Oh yeah, I agree.
To a certain extent. I mean, this is actually one of the weird obsessions of men going their own way. They constantly talk about in the future we're going to have spaceships, and then we're going to have sex bots. We're going.
That's possible, maybe, but it's probably going to be a bit different than sex bots. It's probably going to be.
Yeah, we're going to be able to replace women entirely and have artificial wombs.
But why would you want to? I love my wife; she's amazing.
You have to be really have really a disordered brain to think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
You actually have, advocating for, being a single father, which is, that sort of runs counter to the idea of, you criticize, for example, the way single mothers raise their kids, but, you don't replace. This is in many ways where, the more extreme sectors of anti-feminism and feminism are just mirror images of each other. You don't want single mothers. You don't want single fathers. You want kids being raised by both their mothers and their fathers in an intact family unit.
Right.
Statistics show that,
well, it's better that way. Me and my wife both have kids, and it's better to have, like, we can. All right, so when I interact with my kids, if I had to do it all the time, they would get to see much more of the negative aspect of myself. Whereas if I think I'm getting to the point where I'm having a little bit too much, I need a break, I need some, just 5 minutes to rest my head. 3 kids, got to tell you, it can be a hell of a lot. So we can, it's tag team, man. She takes it when I need a break, and vice versa. We switch it off. It's a beautiful dance that sort of keeps our kids raised in a stable environment.
That's a point I actually hadn't considered, but I was thinking more along the lines of, children, are their beliefs and their personalities are formed by their parents, and in order to get a complete view of how the opposite sex works or how your sex works, you need a single mother cannot cannot teach masculinity to her son. He needs to learn it from his father. Same thing for a man can't teach femininity to his daughter. She has to learn it from her mother, and I think a lot of it, in the case of, like, for example, the men going their own way, or some of the more bitter men, I think a lot of them are raised by single mothers. I know for a fact that Barbarossa, one of the major MGTOW guys, he admits that he was raised by a single mother. So, that's part of, someone who's raised by a single mother, whatever it is not doomed to being a bad
I was raised by a single mother.
Yeah, but, it's something that you have to overcome. You don't. The guy talks about how much he hates the nuclear family when it's obvious. I mean, he admits he wasn't in one. It's
right.
And it creates a lot of disordered thinking. Sons of single mothers tend to, they have higher rates of criminality, higher rates of, becoming single parents themselves. It creates this cycle of dysfunction that has to be ended or at least minimized.
I agree. Well, that's one of the things that's helped me greatly is. As much as I like to talk about it, psychedelics. Up until the point where psychedelics helped me to internalize a lot of the ideas I'd had about the world. Like there's a difference between knowing things, like the right path, or I shouldn't eat this cheeseburger, or I probably should just go ahead and get this wisdom tooth taken care of, or whatever it is. That sort of repetitive bad behavior that you do. But that it's bad behavior in that moment, but you just sort of let the momentum of whatever it is that you're doing carry you. Well, psychedelics had helped me to steer that completely. Like, so I could see these negative things going on in my life, these ways I was interacting with people, or aspects of my personality, without actually making the edits, just saying, oh yeah, I'll get to it. Psychedelics helped, I guess, give me a push to actually edit my life the way I want to see it go.
This is something I have a bit of experience with as well. I mean, back a few months ago, I'll try and muddle the details just in case anyone's watching, but anyone bad. But I experimented with mushrooms, and mine
was probably about 6 to 8 months ago, and it was 6.5 milligrams exactly, powdered.
I probably didn't. I didn't get started off on the right foot here, because I had a dosage that was designed for 2 people, and I took all of it. And
that's what I'm saying. That's considered anything over 5 grams is considered a heroic dose. So I took a massive dose. I went through an entire ego death.
I think I had about 10. In addition to
Jesus,
that, my friend had sent me a couple of Syrian root capsules, which he claimed would double the effect of the mushrooms. So. Okay. I was tripping for at least 12 hours.
That's intense. Mine was about 8, and it was about as intense as I think anything I've ever experienced ever.
I more or less had come down after 8 hours, but I was still like having that sensation where you start merging with your environment.
Right.
But the big thing it did for me was like about like an hour or 2 in, I just sort of had this sort of rushing sensation where I just suddenly remembered every shitty bad thing I'd done to hurt someone else, and I actually started crying. But
I did as well. I've blubbered on the floor for a good solid 2 hours. At least what
Yeah.
felt like 2 hours. I don't really know, but
Yeah, that was the other aspect of it too, time
yeah,
dilation. But afterwards, it felt like it rewired my brain. I
did.
felt
It
more
really
confident, and in many ways, it changed me. It's like some of the things I'd been worried about, just sort of faded away. Like
Well,
I
I used to be a very anxious person, and I used to battle bouts of depression at least, once or twice every month. And since my experience with mushrooms, completely gone.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had quite that radical change, but it made me more confident in dealing with, say, women or whatever, and more confident in my day to day life. I still have issues with, I don't say issues with anxiety. We all have stuff we worry
Right.
about, but I don't let these things sort of cripple me. I mean, about a year ago, I was going through a certain experience that was I don't want to say traumatizing, but very stressful, and my solution for it was drinking a lot. Like I didn't go into full
Hey,
blown
man,
alcoholism.
I've been there. Right here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah, and alcohol is an incredibly bad way to deal with stress.
Yes, it is.
Well,
It
that's what
works,
you're-
though. It certainly, I get it. It takes the pain away in that moment.
It takes away the pain in the moment, but number one, you're wrecking your body.
Yes.
And also number two, after the initial buzz goes away, it actually multiplies whatever bad feelings you were feeling. So you feel infinitely worse. I actually was for a period last summer. I stopped drinking. I had actually made a pledge to not drink for 3 months just to sort of see if I could live without it. And I had to cut it short about a month in just because something happened that I absolutely needed a drink for. But I learned that number one, I'm not an alcoholic. I can live without it.
Right.
And I live in Chicago, which is probably the drunkest city per capita in
like
in America.
Chicago.
Oh yeah, it's the only time I had a struggle was me and a friend of mine. He had just driven in from Detroit, and we were going around to bars in Wrigleyville, which is where Wrigley Field is. It's a total douchebag Tucker Max Central. And I was at we were at this one bar, where they had dueling pianos, and everyone around me was drunk and happy and singing whatever. And it's like I almost felt tempted to take a drink there because it's like I'm having a withdrawal headache just from watching these people
Right.
who are all drunk and happy.
Right.
But that was the only real time I struggled with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've had some good times with alcohol, and I've also had some bad times on alcohol. For me, I've never really had that addictive thing. I've always gotten to the point where I can see where some things could be a problem. Like I never really particularly cared for pain pills, especially recreationally. I recently had broken arm and surgery and everything like that, and so after going through right after surgery, I was taking a lot of pain pills, at least for the first 3 days. And I definitely could see where those could be a problem for some people. But I've never really had that addictive nature, apart from maybe tobacco. But even then, I can quit that fairly easily.
Yeah, same here. Well, part of it may just be because I have just a really high tolerance for substances. It's
Right.
like as one of my friends put it, you drink like a Viking. But it's But I still drink, but it's like I don't drink at home anymore. Usually when I drink, I'm in a social situation,
Yes.
just because I don't enjoy the feeling of getting drunk per se. It's like in a crowd. When you're with friends, it's one thing, but it's like the sitting at home stewing about some problem did not enhance my life in any way. It made my life worse. And I've proven to myself that I can when you learn how to deal with your problems without resorting to any sort of
Right. Well, alcohol will
substance,
take
you're a
away
lot
the
better.
problem temporarily, but a lot of times, in order to fix the problem, you need to fix it in a timely manner, and getting smashed out of your face doesn't fix the problem. Or even just not even smashed out of your face, just drinking enough to not have to worry about it for a little bit. The problem's still there when you come back. Like, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, the only difference is you're out about $20 and
Right.
you've got a headache in the morning.
Exactly. But yeah, man, I think the world is an interesting place, and so is people. And so the idea is to bring people interesting conversations like the one we just had. You have been on for about an hour and 10 minutes, man. Most of my shows last that long. Sometimes they go longer. If you have anything else that you'd like to discuss, man, by all means, I'm here.
I think we covered it. You always want to leave them wanting just a bit more.
Of course. So yeah, if anyone's interested, one more time, man, your site.
Go to my website, mattforney.com. You'll find that's my personal blog, but you'll also find everything else I do for every other site. Everything is there. You can also follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/basemattforney. And I'm on YouTube. Check out, just search Matt Forney. And I have a SoundCloud page. That's where I don't do, that's where my old podcast is, the Matt Forney Show. But you can also find the new podcast there as well at soundcloud.com/mattforney show. That covers everything.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. And if in the future you want to come back on, if you got anything you need to pitch, pitch, new book coming out, any articles or anything you're excited about, or even a topic, by all means, man, give me a shout.
Oh, definitely. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yep, certainly. Have a good one. Oh, that was amazing. That was so good.